Hello, I'm Peter Blackwood. I'm a coordinator of the Uniting Church Icon Schools, and we meet monthly to paint together and to learn together and to worship together. But at the moment we're in stage 4 lockdown in Melbourne, Australia, so we have to meet online. So this video is part of the learning session for the September gathering online of the Uniting Church Icon Schools. There are about 40 of us who are members of that school. If you are beyond that membership, beyond that little community, you're very welcome to watch this video, which today is about paintbrushes for painting icons. And I'd like to talk about my little collection of brushes that I keep in my piggy mug. It was given to me by a colleague. And firstly, to talk about choosing brushes. What kind of brushes do we use in Byzantine iconography? Well, we use watercolour round brushes mainly. And for about 15 years I used synthetic round brushes, Teflon, and then discovered through my teacher Philip Davidov that natural hair brushes are heaps better and just wouldn't use anything else anymore. So natural hair brushes are much better because firstly, they come to a point very much more easily. You can wet them and give them a flick and absolutely sharp point, no matter what size brush you're using. And the other thing is that they have a belly. That is that while they are very pointed, they're also sort of fat at the other end, and therefore hold a lot of paint. That means that unlike the synthetic brushes, you don't have to load the brush as often. So what natural hair brushes do I use? Kolinsky. The Kolinsky brush has all the qualities that you need. In fact, for quite some years, that's all I used. It's quite a relatively stiff brush. Not very. It's very, very pliable, but it does hold a firmer structure. And that is why the other natural hair brush that I've discovered more recently is Squirrel, which is a lot softer, and so particularly for painting, blending, the Squirrel works better than the Kolinsky. The other natural brush that I use is a hog hair, which is really cheap and fat and doesn't go to a point at all, and is very handy for painting the main structure of an icon. There are flat brushes, and I've got only a couple of those, and they're of different sizes and quite useful for painting large areas. These flathead are Kolinsky, so quite firm. So what other brushes? There is one other brush that I have discovered more recently. I've been calling it a mop brush. It mightn't be a mop brush strictly speaking, but it is much fatter. It is Squirrel, therefore it is soft. It's quite stubby, but it holds a lot and is really useful for painting backgrounds. Because it is natural hair, it does flick to a very sharp point, so you can do quite fine work and then also get a nice good spread by pressing hard on it and moving the paint around. Well, what brands do I use? My main source of brush supply is the Rosemary Company in the UK, and their brushes I find really good, and because it's an online store and they are very pleasant and cooperative, I have found them a really good source of good brushes. I particularly use the series 22, but there's also this mop brush series as well. I'm not being remunerated in any way for this plug for the Rosemary Brush Company. But in fairness, I must say, some years ago we made a very big order, and they did send some complimentary brushes from a series, I've forgotten, I think it was a series 8 or something like that. I don't think it's continued anymore. The other source of brushes that I have used, they're from Russia. They're under the brand name Rubloff, and when I was in Russia a number of years ago, my teachers who live in St. Petersburg were very insistent that I buy good Russian brushes. They are cheaper, they are really good. To buy them online is a little bit more tricky. You can source them. I have sourced them through Amazon, but not as easy to source as the Rosemary ones, but really, really nice brushes, both in the Squirrel and Kolinsky. So there are the brushes. How to use them? What painting techniques? There aren't thou shalts about painting, about using brushes, but the method that I've been taught and which I favour is quite dry, and so that each time I load the brush, I mix the pigment and egg together again, even though it's been mixed thoroughly, indeed ground thoroughly with mortar and pestle. But because it's a mixture and not a compound, the pigment will start to sink to the bottom. And so if you don't watch out, each time you load the brush, unless you mix it each time, it's going to be a different colour. So, for starters, mix the paint again, which really puts a lot of paint into the brush, and then wipe it off on the edge 15 to 20 times. The effect of this is that you get quite a thin layer of paint, which is good because as you add more layers, you can still see the colour, the layer underneath. This is a good technique, really helpful. The other thing about this way of painting is it gives you much better control. You're not going to get a blob of paint suddenly arrive on on your panel. It does mean, as I do, because I paint on an easel, so I'm upright all day instead of leaning over a table, and because it's a dry method, it doesn't run, so it is suitable for painting on an easel. The other advantage of this putting on in thin layers, so I've talked about the way in which you can you're better able to see the coat of paint underneath the next layer. Oh, incidentally, the other good thing about it is that because it's thin, it dries more quickly. You don't have to wait for a long time for the next coat to go on. You can just keep painting all day without having to wait or dry off the paint too often. So the other thing is that it blends, because you can see underneath it, it blends better. There are a number of different ways of doing the blending. One is to sort of start at your top end and even dry off the brush even more and draw the paint down into your other area and get it to grade so that you're going from your new colour to blend hopefully almost seamlessly to the colour that was underneath. Another way is to decant a little bit of your paint into another well and add clean water. So it's exactly the same colour, but it is more diluted and therefore easier to see the paint underneath. Another feature of these brushes is that they're very good for glazing. Do we do glazes or do we do washes? My rule of thumb is a glaze is a dry covering of a very diluted coat. A wash is, as it's suggested, is wet and is best applied when the panel or the paint, the surface is flat. And that works really well. Indeed, a feature of this is sometimes called petit lac, in which you're putting the paint on so wet that rather than having the brush touch the surface, you just move the coloured water around the surface, and that gives a nice effect too. I tend to use glaze, that is, very diluted with clean water, dried off brush, and then put it evenly across the surface that I want to give a slightly different tint. I might want to put more rosiness, more red into a skin tone because it just looks too yellow. So that's done with a glaze, and these, particularly the squirrel brushes, just excellent for that. So that's a few things on how I use these brushes to paint. Well, what about brush care? One of our members advocates that a good plan is to dip the brush in water before loading the brush for the first time in the day. So don't use a dry brush at the beginning, so that there's water up inside the ferrule. That's the metal piece of the brush. After the brush is used, wash it thoroughly. Warm water with soap at the end of a job to really clean it off well, remembering that there's egg in the mix, and egg yolk will dry quite hard. Not immediately, not even the next day, but it will dry hard and make a mess of the brush. I'm not sure how it works, but I was told years ago that giving the brushes an occasional rinse in apple cider vinegar. Don't know why it works. It certainly smells good, but that's another tip. There are other products in art shops, and I've not used any of them, so I'm not going to advocate any against another, but I would suggest that one that is suitable for, a style that is suitable for acrylic paint or something like that, water-based colours. The other thing to talk about is how to repair a brush. Sometimes these natural hair brushes get out of shape. A common way to muck up a brush is to leave it bristle down in the water. That's not a good idea. Always take the brush out of the water and lay it flat or upright. But they can get out of shape. I remember one brush arrived from overseas and it was really bent double. But there's a really easy way to fix it. Put some boiling water into a cup. Dip the brush in for no more than 3 seconds. You don't want it to muck around with the glue that holds all the bristles onto the brush. Just dip it in for 3 seconds, take it out and flick it. And it will flick straight to a beautiful point. It's magic. Go for natural hair brushes. They are heaps better. Every time I've introduced people to a natural hair brush when they've been using a synthetic brush in the past, they can't believe their eyes because the result is so much better. Hope this has been helpful. Now, one of the things about the icon world and YouTube is they're very shy about making comments. I'd really like to hear from you. You can make comments underneath this video. You can also click whether you like it, or you can click it if you don't like it. This is helpful too, not just for me, but the main thing is that it helps the distribution of videos, because those that get comments and get likes or even unlikes get distributed more often across the interest groups of artists and iconographers. So you might like to subscribe, but at least put a like or an unlike and make a comment. If you've got something to add or advice, really love to hear. I've got into some really interesting conversations, written conversations with people as a result of these videos. Thank you for watching. Catch you again another time.